This is the land, and these are the waters we know, Tulalip. Since time immemorial, our relatives have honored Mother Earth and all she has given to us. After the 1855 Point Elliott Treaty, when our Snohomish, Snoqualmie, and other allied bands were told to move here, it has been an honor to take care of the Tulalip Reservation. Protecting the land, waters, and resources has always made us defenders of the environment. Being the first people here has given us knowledge. Generation to generation, elders pass down stories and teachings about respecting what surrounds us. Today, in modern times, Tulalip strives to listen to the teachings of our elders. We are trying to pay attention to the challenges of population growth. It's our job to make sure natural resources are protected. Daryl Williams has served as the environmental liaison for Tulalip for many years. For almost 4 decades, he has worked on everything from fisheries to archaeological and cultural issues affecting the tribes. Although recently retired, he is still very much engaged in protecting our land, streams, rivers, and the Salish Sea. Join us as we sit down with Daryl Williams to learn more about environmental issues important to Tulalip. Hi, and welcome to Hibulb Conversations. Today we have Daryl Williams here with us. Daryl, thank you for being here, and congratulations on your recent retirement.
Thank you.
Yes, we're so grateful to have you visiting with us so we can learn more about our environment, where we live, and what we can do to protect it. Now, you spent 39 years working in environmental for land and water mostly. And there was so much still to do. You're still working on contract?
Yeah, I'm still working 5 to 6 days a month, and actually my first 5 years were working with our hatchery program. So I've done about everything in the 39 years that our natural resources department works on.
And are you having a hard time only working a few days a month now?
No. After 39 years, I'm ready for a break.
So tell us, you grew up on the reservation?
Yes.
And who are your parents?
Marge and Adam Williams.
Okay, and some of your other family?
My brother Terry, my sisters Sandy and Sherry.
Okay. How did you get interested in taking care of the land, water, and natural resources?
It's always been a little bit of an interest for me, but once I graduated high school, talked to Bernie Gobin about things that he did with his program, and he was the one who actually asked me to apply here. And so I did, and he ended up hiring me, and originally for an 18-month position, but I just never left.
18 months that turned into 39 years?
Yeah, but the first 18 months were actually doing construction work for old hatchery system we had before the hatchery we have now.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful that you had the opportunity to work with Bernie.
Yeah.
Was he like a mentor to you?
Yes, he was. For a few of us in the department that were here at the time, a few of us long-timers left.
And what positions have you held over the years?
There have been several, but as I said, first was doing construction, and then kind of as a hatchery tech, raising the fish. And after about 5 years, I transferred into the environmental field when we hired Dave Summers as our environmental biologist. And of course, he's now our county executive, so he got out of biology and got into politics. But I've been dealing with habitat stuff primarily ever since. One position I had was as an information management coordinator, and I actually started the GIS program for our natural resources department back in '82.
Wow.
So yeah, the system wasn't anywhere near as nice as what we have now. But with the environmental program, we've of course spend most of our time dealing with fish habitat issues, but I started the tribe's air quality program back in the mid-'80s and early '90s, somewhere in there. And the last few years have primarily actually been working on agricultural issues. But we do spend a lot of time just reviewing development permits and I'm one of the few that's actually worked on the broad scope of things, dealing anywhere from housing developments to hydroelectric development to our state ferry system, redesigning their ferry terminals or moving their ferry terminals. So I've dealt with a little bit of everything.
Wow, that's quite the resume you've built over the years. You said you graduated high school in 1977?
Yes.
And then did you go on to college?
Yeah, I started out that fall at Everett Community College, just going there part-time while working full-time. And then after a few years, I took a little break, just had too much going on, but then restarted at Columbia and finished my associate's degree. And one thing that surprised me when I kind of quit going to Everett Community College is when I went back to Columbia, I realized I was only one class short of finishing my associate's. So I got that taken care of and then continued on for a bachelor's degree. And by that time, I wasn't really doing field work anymore and decided to kind of change majors from an environmental sciences program to business. So I graduated with a business degree.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank
now
you.
with all your spare time, you can do your master's. Let's talk about fisheries. What was it like nearly 40 years ago when you started?
Well, it was a very different time. It was just after the Bolt decision, and well, in '77 was actually before the Supreme Court upheld the decision. So there was a lot of fighting going on between the state and the tribes. And back then, the Natural Resources Department for all the tribes, including Tulalip, were pretty small. We had an office staff of, I think, 5 people, and then we had 12 of us out in the field, basically building our hatchery program and operating it. But we only had one fisheries biologist at the time when I started. Cliff Bankston was our first one. So he did basically everything. Now we've got specialized biologists for harvest management, for managing the fisheries, and for habitat, for wildlife. And we have other specialties now for hydrology, geology, and wetlands, and other specific areas.
And where were we, or what was the atmosphere like after the Bolt decision?
The tribes are sort of like one big close-knit family. We all had a single goal, trying to force the state into doing proper fisheries management. One of the things we found out when we started really looking into how the state managed fisheries is that they really didn't have any data to go by. All they were doing was just kind of opening up seasons on a regular schedule, not really knowing what kind of an impact they were having on the fisheries. And it was really when we hired our first true harvest management biologist, was Mike Hinton, that we really started to change how the state managed fisheries. Tulalip, as well as other tribes, started hiring fisheries biologists that were also good statisticians, and were able to kind of collect data and look at the data to figure out what harvest rates we really should be managing for, when before it was just a pure guess of what we were doing. So it's really the tribes that really force the state into proper fisheries management to try to maintain our fish runs.
This is also interesting. We're going to take a break and come back and talk more with Daryl. Hi, welcome back to Hibulb Conversations. We're here talking with Daryl Williams, an environmental expert for the Tulalip Tribes. Thanks again for joining us, Daryl.
My pleasure.
Will you tell us what it was like to work with tribal leaders like Bernie Gobin and Stan Jones?
Those early years when I was working with Bernie and Stan were great. They both had, our tribal treaty rights for natural resources as a high priority, and really fought hard for getting the things that the tribes needed, whether it was going to or traveling back to DC to get funding, or to try to change some of the federal rules dealing with fisheries management, or heading down to Olympia and dealing with the governor and the legislature and the fisheries managers there to try to change how the state was doing things. They were a good team. They worked well together. As a team, when they really pushed for something, they generally got it. Yeah, today when the tribe has so many other things that are high priorities, we don't really get as much time out of our board members, but Mel and Glenn still put in a fair amount of time and help when it's needed. But back in those early days when fisheries was a real high priority for the tribes, that teamwork between Bernie and Stan was great.
And who are some other leaders that you had the pleasure of working with?
Oh, I've worked with a lot. I mean, being here since '77, I've worked with every fisheries manager we've had, and of course we've had several board members come and go. But you know, Bernie and Stan were really the standouts in the early years. Mel and Glenn have kind of picked up the load in these more recent years, and of course other board members we have participate at different times. But you know, our board is kind of split in a way where different board members kind of key on different priorities for the tribe, which I think is a good thing, because there's a lot of things the tribe needs to concern themselves with, and having individual board members that are willing to step up and deal with those different issues is great. Yeah, I hate to start listing or start listing fisheries directors, because I know I'll forget a few.
Right.
But yeah, in general, you know, our board members and fisheries directors have all done a good job over the years.
Now, in the 70s and 80s, when you were trying to partner and reach out to move forward with environmental projects, how did you go about doing that?
Well, late 70s, early 80s, it was really more dealing with things in the courts. We really didn't get into trying to work with people that much, because in general they didn't want to work with us. Right. But I guess primarily late 70s, because I think it was in 1980 when we originally filed the Phase 2 decision of US v. Washington, which dealt with habitat issues. And under Judge Orrick on the first round, we won that case, showing that the tribes do have a right to protect habitat under the treaties. When it was appealed, we lost the appeal, and then we appealed again, and we won in part and lost in part. The courts held that we had the right to protect habitat, but they threw out the remedy that Judge Orrick had put in his decision. And the courts basically told the tribes of the state to start working together to try to solve the problem, so that because they didn't think either side would really like a decision that the court would give. Plus, the courts really didn't want to deal with the broad scope of habitat issues. They also told us if we couldn't work things out, that when we came back to them, we needed to bring up a specific issue. So we started working with different groups dealing with development along the river basins, and we formed the Timber, Fish, and Wildlife process, where we were working with the timber industry, state, local governments, and some nonprofit organizations on forestry management, where we really changed the laws on how forestry was managed. We worked with the industry to provide better buffers, to manage their roads better so we weren't getting so much sediment runoff, change their practices to help prevent landslides into our rivers. So there were a lot of things that came out of that process. And of course, with local governments started developing better land use regulations as well to protect habitat. But we still haven't gone as far as we really need to go. We've been in a number of those processes over the years. But even with the amount of money that we're putting into habitat restoration now, we're still destroying habitat faster than we're recreating it. So unless we can turn that around, our fish populations are going to continue to decline. So it's a long, tough battle, but
Right.
every year we're gaining a little more ground.
Now, in the late 70s and early 80s, with the Bolt decision and tribes really getting into environmental practices, did you see a lot of racism and pushback working with local communities?
Particularly in the late 70s, right after the initial Bolt decisions, we really had race riots in this area. Mm-hmm. Non-tribal fishermen were shooting at tribal fishermen. There was all sorts of news articles going on about how bad tribal fishing was coming out of the sports industry and state commercial fishing industry. But in the early 80s, we were able to turn some of that around. It wasn't so much of that bad talking about tribal fishing in the press, and some of the sports groups were starting to work with us because they saw the benefit of working with us to try to improve habitat conditions for fish, which they depend on as well as we do. So we did have some common ground there. Trout Unlimited was one of the sports groups that we worked with closely in the early 80s. And they had a tribal liaison that was great to work with, and I just can't remember his name right now, but we were able to start developing some good working relationships with some of those groups. Last few years, some of that's been kind of flaring up again, and I think part of the problem is that we just haven't been talking to those groups that much in more recent years, and we need to maintain those communications so that each side understands what the other's doing and why. Because I think when we really explain what we're doing to them, they understand and can support most of what we're doing.
Yeah, those relationships are extremely important. Thanks again for being here. We're all learning so much. Let's take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Hibulb Conversations. We're here with Daryl Williams. Daryl, can you tell us a little bit about water quality and the work you've done around it?
Yeah, we really started working on water quality issues back in the mid-'80s, kind of doing some basic water quality monitoring in our rivers, because to have healthy fish, you need to have clean water. And also for those of us that eat the fish, we want the fish we eat to be healthy. And during the 80s, most of the contaminants we had were minor stuff that, by the way, of human health, but were very important for fish health. But more recently, we've been having a lot more of the different chemicals getting into our water supply that affect the fish health, but also affect our health. And of course, we've been working with the state and EPA to try to improve water quality standards. Both the state and the EPA have their own processes going on in parallel now for adopting those standards, which hopefully will be completed here this month. And what comes out of it will help. One of the problems with the water quality standards that are coming out is that they really only address a few of the chemicals that are hitting our waterways. One of the chemicals they really don't address very well are fire retardants, which we're finding heavy concentrations of in the Snohomish. And a recent report done by the State Fish and Wildlife Department shows that the concentrations are high enough that it's actually causing some liver damage to our Chinook produced in the river, which makes the Chinook more susceptible to other diseases. But there are a lot of other chemicals hitting our waterways that affect both the fish and the people that eat them. So we really need to step up our efforts in that area.
And it seems that there's a disconnect between what we know and what the state requires for the salmon and the health of our environment. What can you tell us about that?
There's definitely some gaps. In recent years, the state and the tribes really haven't been working as well together as we had for a while. So they're not really telling us everything they're doing, and in response, we're not really telling them everything we're doing either. And somehow we got to get those communications back on track and get both sides trusting each other again. But for fisheries management, we really need to do a better job of monitoring what's going on in our environment, whether it's water quality or fish habitat concerns, and deal with all the issues, not just the ones that are currently in state and federal regulations, especially with the water quality issues, because there are just so many chemical contaminants out there that we really don't have any regulations for. And we don't really have enough studies completed yet to show what the impacts of those chemicals are on fish and on people. But part of the problem is that there's a few hundred new chemicals developed every year, and neither the federal or state governments have the resources needed to really analyze the effects of all those different chemicals as they're being developed. But we're falling way behind on trying to analyze those chemicals and really don't have the full picture of what the harm is. But as we do complete studies, we're finding out that a lot of those chemicals are very harmful for both fish and for people.
You had a big part of the kwalu project. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I had a big part in getting it started. It really started about the time we were completing work on our old Superfund site, the Tulalip landfill, which was basically land the tribe leased out to some disposal companies, and they had basically collected all the solid waste from Seattle and surrounding communities, as well as Tulalip, and buried it on site. And in that mix was all sorts of waste, from household waste to military waste to nuclear waste. It all went there. So we kind of dealt with that site, and as we were finishing it, part of what we had to do was mitigate for natural resources damages caused by that landfill. And we collected funds from numerous responsible parties and used some of that money to purchase an old farm next to Marysville for a restoration project. But we were looking at kind of the whole area there that was diked off from the Snohomish and looking at recovering it. So there were several more parcels we had to buy after that. But we used money from the Superfund project to get it started with. And then we brought kind of handed things off to Kurt Nelson, our environmental manager now, to take the lead on developing up the plans for restoring the site and obtaining the grants needed to bring in the money to purchase the remaining properties and to pay for the restoration efforts. But that was about a 400-acre site. About 350 some acres are in the intertidal zone, so it's a good estuary marsh now, and the remainder is kind of freshwater wetland and some uplands. But that site took us close to 20 years to complete. But just the day after we breached the dike, we were monitoring fish inside that area. So fish are going in and using the site now and making use of it. It's an area that's really important for salmon migrating out, because we've got thousands of miles of streams in the Snohomish that are producing the various species of salmon, but each species tends to migrate out around within a few weeks time frame, and they're all in that estuary together. So we have fish from thousands of miles of streams all using those estuaries at the same time. And with the amount of estuary that's been diked or filled, it's really been limiting to produce the habitat that the fish need to adapt to salt water and to put on the growth they need before heading out into Puget Sound and out to the ocean. So the estuary areas are very important for those young fish, and our project is a big piece of restoring the Snohomish to be able to handle the production that the river has.
And what can tribal members do to help protect our lands and waters?
A lot of what needs to happen really needs to be be done by individual landowners and residents. People living near the waters need to be able to really pay attention to what they're doing that may affect water quality, and protect fish habitat. But another thing that we really need is, when you look at our department and all the staff we have great staff, but very few tribal members working in our department, mainly because most of our staff have technical degrees that our tribal members just don't have. In more recent years, we've been getting a lot more tribal members going on to college and getting their degrees in medicine, teaching, law. Seems like everything except natural resources management, and we really would like to see our membership start getting the degrees in those areas. And I know we have a few tribal members in college now working towards those degrees, but we need more, and we also need to start coming up with the funding so we can start hiring our own members in entry-level positions. Because most of the time when we're hiring for somebody, we're looking for someone that already has the experience, because we just don't have that many positions, and the people we need to bring in people that really know what they're doing. But we need to start creating positions for our members to come in and kind of learn the job as well as having the education, because education alone isn't what's needed for those positions. Mm-hmm. So I'd really love to see more tribal members doing the work that our non-tribal biologists are doing.
And is there anything else you'd like to say about your work and to tell our viewers?
I've basically worked for Tulalip my whole adult life. It's been a good place to work. I've worked with a lot of good people over the years. And one thing I like about working for the tribe in natural resources management versus state and local governments is that the tribes really give us the leeway to do what we think is best most of the time. State employees are kind of limited by the policies of their agencies and what they're allowed to say in public, but Tulalip really hasn't limited our staff that much. We've always believed that we need to go where the science tells us to go. So we really try to use the information that our technical staff give us to make the decisions we need to make. And it's really been a great place to work.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. We've all learned so much from your stories and all the years you've spent with the tribes, and congratulations again on your retirement.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us on Hibulb Conversations. I'm Mytyl Hernandez. Until next time.